Right now, as you're watching this, the ground is cracking open in 3 different parts of the planet at the same time. In Indonesia, the Anak Krakatau volcano just had its alert level raised to Siaga, level 3 of 4, after a fresh eruption sent a dense ash column into the sky over the Sunda Strait. Days earlier, Mount Semeru in East Java produced a pyroclastic flow that came down the slope with enough force to be caught on camera from kilometers away. And in May, Mount Volcano on Halmahera Island erupted so suddenly that 3 hikers who ignored a closure order never made it back down. Meanwhile, in Iceland, scientists are watching the ground itself rise. Magma has been accumulating beneath the Svartsengi system for over 10 months, the longest quiet stretch since the current eruption cycle began. And officials say a new eruption is now the most likely outcome in the coming weeks. And in Mexico, Popocatepetl, the volcano that sits just 70 kilometers from a city of 22 million people, has been erupting almost continuously, with ash plumes reaching 24,000 feet, and a permanent 12-kilometer exclusion zone that nobody is allowed to cross. This is not a coincidence stitched together for a headline. These are 3 real, currently active volcanic systems on 3 different continents, and today we are going to break down exactly what is happening at each one, how dangerous it actually is, and what happens if any of them goes further than expected. No exaggeration, no doomsday guessing, just the geology, the data, and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever seen a volcano in person, felt ash fall from the sky, or lived near one that everybody just learned to live with? Tell me where you were. So many of you write in from Indonesia, from the Philippines, from Mexico, and I read every single one of those comments. If you want to know the moment something changes at any of these 3 volcanoes, subscribe right now. It costs nothing. And a thumbs up tells the algorithm to actually show this to the people who need to see it. Let us get into it. Indonesia sits directly on top of the most volcanically dangerous stretch of the Ring of Fire on the planet, home to more than 130 active volcanoes, more than any other country on Earth. And right now, several of them are speaking at once. Anak Krakatau, the child of the volcano that produced one of the deadliest eruptions in recorded history in 1883, has a documented history that should make anyone pay attention. In December 2018, an eruption triggered the collapse of roughly 64 hectares of the volcano's flank directly into the sea. That collapse displaced a wall of water that became a tsunami, striking the coastlines of Banten and Lampung provinces with no warning at all, because the trigger was not an earthquake. It was a mountain falling into the ocean. On July the 2nd of this year, Indonesia's geological agency raised Anak Krakatau's alert level again after a fresh eruption sent ash and gas high above the crater, and authorities have explicitly told coastal communities not to panic and not to assume an eruption automatically means an imminent tsunami, while also telling them plainly that the volcano has a documented history of generating exactly that kind of event. That combination of calm and caution is deliberate, because false alarms erode trust, but so does silence. At the same time, roughly 700 kilometers away in East Java, Mount Semeru, Java's tallest volcano at nearly 3,700 meters, produced an explosive eruption that sent a pyroclastic flow racing down its southeastern flank. A pyroclastic flow is not lava in the way most people picture it. It is a superheated mixture of gas, ash, and rock fragments that can move at highway speeds and reach temperatures over 400 degrees Celsius. And it does not care whether you are inside a car or a building when it arrives. Semeru has remained at standby alert for months, which means the observatory is telling residents this is not a one-time event. It is a sustained state of unrest. And then there's Volcano, on the remote island of Halmahera, a volcano that has technically been erupting continuously since 1933, making it one of the longest-running eruptions on the planet. In May, a hiking guide who has watched this mountain for years described it as unusually quiet in the days before a major explosion, the kind of quiet that experienced observers know can precede pressure finally breaking free. When it broke, 3 people who had entered a zone closed since the previous December did not survive. 15 others made it down. The tour guide himself said he thought everyone had died before the final count came in. This is the uncomfortable truth about volcanoes like Volcano. The danger is not hidden. It is announced, mapped, and enforced with a 4-kilometer exclusion zone, and people still cross the line because the mountain looks calm on the surface right up until it isn't. Now let us go to Iceland, because what is happening there is the opposite kind of story. It is not chaos. It is one of the most closely monitored volcanic systems on Earth, tracked almost to the cubic meter. The Reykjanes Peninsula in southwest Iceland woke up in March 2021 after roughly 800 years of silence. And since then, it has produced a dozen eruptions, 9 of them along the same fissure system near the town of Grindavik. The last of those eruptions ended in August of last year. Since then, the Icelandic Meteorological Office has been watching magma accumulate beneath the Svartsengi region month after month using satellite radar that can detect ground uplift of just a few centimeters. As of the most recent readings, more than 20 million cubic meters of magma have gathered underground, and that volume is now approaching the highest level measured at any point since this entire eruption sequence began. Ground uplift has been continuing at roughly 2 centimeters a month, and the current pause without an eruption, over 10 months now, is the longest gap in the whole Svartsengi series. Scientists describe the mechanism in almost mechanical terms. Magma fills an underground reservoir, pressure builds against the surrounding rock, and eventually the rock gives way and the magma finds a path to the surface through a fissure. A petrologist at Uppsala University put it plainly earlier this year, saying the volume of magma beneath the system has now returned to where it was right before the last eruption, and that Iceland is probably going to erupt again very soon. But here is what makes Iceland fundamentally different from Indonesia. When Icelandic volcanologists say soon, their actual warning window before an eruption begins is between 20 minutes and about 4 hours. That sounds terrifyingly short until you understand what happens in that window. The town of Grindavik has already been evacuated. Keflavik International Airport, which handles almost all international arrivals to the country, has continued operating normally through every one of the last 12 eruptions because these are fissure eruptions. Slow-moving lava flows in a largely uninhabited landscape, not explosive ash columns that ground aircraft. The lava does not sprint toward cities, it creeps, and Iceland has spent years building protective berms, specifically at Grindavik, to redirect flows away from remaining structures. This is a country that treats an active volcano the way other countries treat a hurricane forecast, with hazard maps updated on a schedule, with a public that has learned the drill, and with authorities who communicate uncertainty honestly instead of pretending they can predict the exact day. Now, Mexico. Popocatepetl is the second highest volcano in North America, a glacier-capped stratovolcano whose name literally means smoking mountain in the Aztec language, and it has been active since long before anyone in the region wrote things down, with eruptions recorded in Aztec codices centuries ago. The current eruptive period began back in 2005 and has never fully stopped, cycling through phases of intensifying and quieting activity ever since. Right now, Mexico's National Disaster Prevention Agency has it sitting at yellow alert, phase 2, the middle tier on their scale, meaning the volcano is producing sustained low-level activity that could escalate, but has not crossed into the danger zone requiring evacuation. In recent months, that has meant hundreds of low-intensity gas and ash emissions nearly every single day, along with volcano-tectonic earthquakes and periods of high-frequency tremor that seismologists watch closely because tremor patterns often shift before larger explosive episodes. Ash plumes have repeatedly risen to over 24,000 feet, forcing aviation authorities to issue repeated warnings to pilots operating anywhere near central Mexico. Here's the number that actually matters. Mexico City, one of the largest metropolitan areas on the planet with more than 20 million people living in its wider region, sits just 70 kilometers from this crater. A permanent 12-kilometer exclusion zone surrounds the volcano, and the communities living just outside that ring have built their entire relationship with the mountain around one central fact, that Popocatepetl has never fully gone quiet in 20 years, and it is not expected to. What almost nobody outside volcanology realizes is that the real long-term danger from Popocatepetl is not the ash, it is the lahars, the volcanic mud flows created when eruption debris mixes with rain or melting glacier ice and races down river valleys with the consistency of wet concrete, capable of burying entire towns built on what used to look like solid ground decades earlier. One thing that confuses a lot of people when volcano news breaks is the difference between an alert level and an actual eruption. They hear the word eruption and picture rivers of lava swallowing towns, when in reality, most of what we just described is degassing, small explosions, and ash venting, which is a volcano breathing, not a volcano collapsing. Scientists use something called the Volcanic Explosivity Index, a scale from 0 to 8 that measures how much material the volcano ejects and how high the plume travels. It works the same way the earthquake magnitude scale works. Each step upward represents a roughly 10-fold increase in the volume of material erupted. VEI2, which describes most of what Semeru and Volcano are currently producing in their more active days, ejects somewhere in the range of 1 million cubic meters of material, enough to be genuinely dangerous to anyone standing close, but localized. A VEI4, the kind of event that can close regional airspace for days and bury nearby villages under meters of ash, ejects roughly a cubic kilometer, 1,000 times more material. The 1883 Krakatau eruption, the direct ancestor of the Anak Krakatau we are watching today, was estimated at VEI 6, an event so massive it altered global sunsets for years afterward and produced a sound wave that circled the entire planet multiple times, heard nearly 5,000 kilometers away in Australia. That is the ancestry sitting underneath today's alert level increase, and it is exactly why Indonesian authorities do not treat a Siaga warning casually, even when the current activity is a fraction of what that mountain once did. Understanding this scale matters because the next time you see a volcano alert on the news, you will know that Yellow Alert Phase 2 in Mexico and Siaga Level 3 in Indonesia are not interchangeable panic buttons. They are precise technical classifications built from decades of seismic and gas data, and the gap between one level and the next can represent an enormous difference in real-world danger. So here's the honest question. Is something bigger happening across the planet right now, or are we just watching the Ring of Fire do what it has always done? The scientific answer is nuanced. Earth experiences volcanic eruptions constantly. Somewhere between 40 and 50 volcanoes are erupting at any given moment, if you count every level of activity globally, most of them never making a headline. The Ring of Fire, a roughly 40,000 kilometer arc of tectonic boundaries circling the Pacific Ocean, accounts for around 75% of the world's active volcanoes and around 90% of its earthquakes. Indonesia sits directly on it. Mexico sits directly on it. Iceland is a genuine geological exception, sitting not on the Ring of Fire, but on the mid-Atlantic ridge, the only place on the planet where a divergent tectonic boundary rises above sea level and intersects a mantle hotspot at the same time, which is exactly why it produces so much more magma than a typical ridge system. So no, the planet has not suddenly become more active. What has changed is how many of us now live close enough to feel it. Millions of people live within the shadow of Mount Semeru and Anak Krakatau. 22 million people live within a lahar's reach of Popocatepetl. And every single tourist who flies into Keflavik this year will be within driving distance of an active magma system. The difference between a volcano that becomes a tragedy and a volcano that becomes a managed event comes down to three things: monitoring, honest public communication, and whether people actually respect the line drawn on the map. Indonesia has some of the most sophisticated volcano monitoring in the world through its geological agency, and it still lost 3 lives this year to people who caused a closure they knew existed. Iceland has near-perfect monitoring and has evacuated an entire town in advance of trouble rather than after it. Mexico lives with a smoking mountain at its doorstep and has built an entire alert culture, from Yellow Phase 2 to Red Alert, specifically so that 20 million people know exactly what each stage means before it happens. If you live anywhere near an active volcanic zone, here is what is actually worth doing today, not someday. Know your evacuation route before you need it, not after. Keep a dust mask or a proper respirator at home because volcanic ash is not like dust. It is fine glass and rock that can damage your lungs and any engine you drive through it. Keep your vehicle's fuel tank above half full during any active alert period, because fuel stations along evacuation routes can run dry within hours once an official warning goes out and roads fill with people trying to leave at the same time. If you are traveling to Iceland, Indonesia, or central Mexico this year, check the official hazard status before you go anywhere near a crater rim. And respect every closure line, because the 3 people who did not come down from Volcano this year were not reckless by nature. They simply trusted that the mountain was home. It did not stay that way. And if you live inside a lahar path near a glaciated volcano like Popocatepetl, know that the danger does not end when the ash stops falling, because a lahar can travel down a valley hours or even days after the eruption itself, triggered by nothing more than a heavy rainstorm washing loose ash off the upper slopes. The families who live closest to these mountains are not the ones who need convincing of the risk. They already live it every single day. The people who need this information most are the ones who assume a volcano is a postcard until the week it isn't. Final thought. A volcano does not care about your itinerary, your content calendar, or your assumption that today is a normal day. Indonesia, Iceland, and Mexico are giving us 3 completely different case studies happening simultaneously right now in real time. One is a country living with sudden explosive danger and a tragic reminder of what happens when a warning gets ignored. One is a country turning an active eruption into a science experiment they can predict within hours instead of years. And one is a city of 22 million people that has simply learned to coexist with a mountain that never fully stops smoking. We have no ability to stop a volcano and no perfect ability to predict the exact hour it erupts. What we do have, and what these 3 places prove in 3 different ways, is the ability to choose how ready we are before the ground moves. We will keep tracking every one of these systems as the data updates, every alert level change at Anak Krakatau, every cubic meter of magma measured under Svartsengi, every ash advisory out of Popocatepetl. Subscribe so you do not miss it, and leave that comment below. Have you ever stood near an active volcano or lived in its shadow without even thinking about it day to day? Because these are not just geological events, they are the places millions of people call home. Let us get this one to 5,000 likes so the right people see it. See you in the next one.